If you've watched auto racing in any capacity in North America, then you have inevitably seen one of these things hurtling around a short track somewhere. These squat, low-riding, aerodynamically slick, four-wheeled speed demons are called late models. Wait a second, late model? Late model of what? Well, it's just the latest model of current street cars, like Camaros, Mustangs, etc. Hold up, these don't look like any street cars I've ever seen. And they certainly don't look like NASCAR stock cars either. What exactly is going on here? Well, that's going to take some explaining, so buckle up, because late model racing is the basis for all stock car racing in America as we know it. Welcome to the ground floor. To put it bluntly, late model racing has existed for as long as the second automobile has. Gotta have somebody to race against, right? Everybody wants to see the latest and greatest cars run against each other to determine which one is better. That show pretty much just sells itself. But as far as the world of NASCAR stock car racing is concerned, late model racing made its officially sanctioned debut in July of 1949 with the very first NASCAR strictly stock race. The NASCAR modified division had existed since 1948, but that division ran older pre-World War II cars that had been heavily modified for racing, as the name implies. The strictly stock division was different though. Its rule set mandated that all entrants had to run a car from the current model year or the last 2 years, thus the name, a late model. The strictly stock division would go on to be the NASCAR Cup Series today, and all throughout the 20th century, promo material called these cars late models, and even today you still hear some older commentators refer to the Cup cars as late model stock cars. But hold up, I thought these were late models today, not these, right? Correct, and yes, the language is going to get a bit fuzzy, but for the purposes of clarity, we're going to focus on local short track racing and how they created these late models that we see today. When NASCAR wasn't hosting a major league race at one of the hundreds of tracks that they went to over the decades, it was up to individual track owners to host weekly races themselves to keep the lights turned on. So, seeing the interest in NASCAR, they also began hosting late model races, with rules that were nearly identical to NASCAR. In NASCAR's infancy, it was not uncommon to see a big NASCAR star do a big league NASCAR race, and then the very next day go to some local short track and race there with the exact same car. However, as the economy geared up in the 1950s, buying the newest car every 2 years just to bust it up at the local short track was becoming far too costly. Cars were no longer utilitarian family paddy wagons. They were now luxury items and symbols of personal wealth. Even taking into account inflation, the price of cars was becoming too much for the average local yokel to just buy for shots and goggles. That was about the time when someone had a very devious idea. What if I find a brand new 55 Chevy Bel Air that's broken down, buy just the body, and hang it on my older car's frame and race that?
That's f***ing illegal.
Well, not yet it ain't. Who knows how long people got away with this, but by the mid-60s, all attempts to stop it were all for naught, as even NASCAR itself had started allowing teams to put together purpose-built racing chassis and then hang the newest car bodies on top of them. It made the cars faster, improved safety, and pretty much completely kneecapped the concept as a cost-cutting measure, as local late model racers began buying or building their own racing chassis. As the 70s continued on, costs continued to mount for late models on asphalt and dirt. While dirt late models went off and did their own thing, a king of the asphalt scene had already emerged, the White Knight, Dick Trickle. Yeah, go ahead and make your jokes, but at the time the Wisconsinite might have been the highest paid stock car driver in America. He not only had the clout, money, and talent to show up to every major league late model race in the country and win, but an insane work ethic to boot. He wouldn't race once or twice a week, he'd show up to as many as 4 or 5 shows per week. If there was a late model race going on somewhere that was paying good money and he thought he had any chance of getting there by the time inspection started, he'd be there. In 1972 alone, he won 67 features. Through sheer volume of winners' purses, he was likely making more money than Richard Petty during this time. Dick Trickle came from poverty, having grown up in a farming community, and as a kid he'd take any job he could get, making a nickel here or a dime there. By the time he was 15 in the mid-50s, he'd cobbled together about $100 and built his first race car. As he slogged his way up through the lower rungs of the Midwest short track scene, he kept building up, never slowing down, until he became the monster of short track racing we know now. All told, it was nearly a 20-year process. He certainly didn't have this just bestowed upon him out of nowhere. It all came from hard work. However, his tear through the ranks had left everybody else attempting to beat him by outspending him. By the time the late 70s came around, costs were so out of control that an odd scenario had occurred. Guys had cars, but they were so expensive, they stopped showing up to weekly races. Instead, they'd keep their cars mothballed until big races came along. The Martinsville 300, the Slinger Nationals, the Snowball Derby, etc. Car counts at local short tracks continued to drop, and it became apparent that someone somewhere had to do something. Our unlikely hero would end up being the president of Old Dominion Speedway in Manassas, Virginia, a guy by the name of Dickie Gore. Jesus, what is with these names? Anyway, he called a meeting between his top competitors prior to the 1978 season and tried to come up with a new rule set to cap costs. They decided to use as many stock parts as possible. Everything from carburetors to shocks to exhaust were all stock parts bought straight from the factory. Even the front ends of the cars were taken directly from Camaros right off the street. All told, including the cost of a motor, you could buy one of these cars for as little as $4,000, a little more than half of what big late models were going for. Thus, the late model stock was born. In the very first race Gore held under the late model stock rule set, he had just 5 cars show up. But by the end of '78, he had 11 cars consistently showing up and paying entry fees. By 1981, it was the biggest division at Old Dominion Speedway, and NASCAR added the rule set to their rule book, recognizing it as an official division. Nowadays, when you roll into any local short track for a late model race, these are what you see, late model stocks. However, some guys still wanted to go absolutely hog wild and see how far they could go. With so much money from corporate sponsors now flooding the NASCAR landscape from the highest division to the lowest, some guys had the funds to do some seriously insane stuff, and now they had a new option, the super late model. These things look like something shaped more by natural selection than mechanical ingenuity. They honestly look like the offspring of a rocket ship and a great white shark. And yes, they were every bit as fast as they looked. Some of the mad scientists we have to thank for these ridiculous race cars are Gary Ballou and Ray Dillon, as they pushed the envelope of late model racing to unspeakable heights. But honestly, the list of men who added on to the development of the supers stretches from here to the moon. Everyone put their own spin on it, and much like the super modifieds, everyone looked completely unique. But also like the super modifieds, mass production was on the way. By the time the 90s came around, anybody who wanted to purchase late model parts could from verified suppliers who made sure to follow a strict template. Eventually, there were 3 main late model divisions. Limited late models ran scuffed tires with smaller carburetors limiting horsepower. A late model stock and a limited late model are essentially the same, but the stocks are allowed to run newer sticker tires and have bigger, better carburetors. And finally, a super late model has a more aerodynamically aggressive body which runs a 90-degree spoiler, about 50 more horsepower over a stock, weighs about 300 pounds less, and the single biggest difference? A holdover from the innovation of the 80s, the straight rail chassis. A late model stock runs what is called a perimeter chassis, which means the frame rails on the left and right are equal distance from the center line of the car. A straight rail or offset design has the right side frame rail running straight from nose to tail, so that most of the weight is on the left side, helping the car turn better at speed, since all the short tracks are run counterclockwise. Supers also have looser rules, so innovation is still possible in that division. But that wasn't enough for some folks. One of the offshoots during the 80s became known as the Outlaw late model. With straight lines and a squat body, the Outlaws kind of look like the supers of the 80s, and they mostly settled in the Midwest. Rules are very loose for the Outlaws, as the name implies, but to keep costs contained, one very simple rule has defined them since day one. The body must be comprised of 4 contiguous pieces of sheet metal. That's it. 2 on the sides, 1 in the front, and 1 in the back. Simple but brutally effective is the name of their game. The more rare variant is the Winged Outlaw, and holy smoly, just look at that thing. With a sail that big, it's pretty much impossible to spin out because of the stupid amount of side force it generates. And just think about the ad space available. It's basically a gigantic billboard strapped on top of a race car. Actually, no, keep that thing away from NASCAR upper management. They might start getting ideas. Dirt late models eventually joined their modified counterparts in taking pointers from sprint cars and morphed into the hiked up speed demons we see today. They are perhaps even more popular than their asphalt brethren. And since they can beat and bang with their closed wheel wells, they almost always put on one hell of an event wherever they show up. They're a hit all over the country, but especially in the Southeast where they originated. Since the 70s, late model racing has become the starting point for just about anybody looking to get to the top division of NASCAR. From Mark Martin to Denny Hamlin, from Dick Trickle to William Byron, this is the ground floor. This is where it all begins for most drivers. So if you want to see the future stars of NASCAR, they're out there right now in all 50 states, tuning up their late models for a Saturday night showdown somewhere. The NASCAR Advanced Auto Parts Weekly Series is the sanctioning body for all local late model racing in the US, and every year a national champion is crowned, and it's a throwback to the way things used to be. Drivers crisscross the country and compete in as many different events at NASCAR-sanctioned tracks as they can, sometimes going to nearly 50 races per season. In 2021, Peyton Sellers took the title, and Josh Berry did the same before him in 2020. There's also the big standalone events that draw in 40 or 50 entrants. the Martinsville 300, the Winchester 400, the All-American 400 at the Nashville Fairgrounds, and dozens of others. With 5-figure checks on the line, things will get hairy and tempers will flare, but there's honestly no better way to spend 10 or 20 bucks to see one of these things in person if you ask me. As for touring series, the ARC Late Model Series dominates the Midwest, the Cars Tour sticks to the Southeast, and the American-Canadian Tour covers the Northeast, along with many others across North America. So if you're interested in seeing the best of the best short trackers in the country, those 3 divisions are a great place to start. With so many variants, divisions, and tracks hosting these races, late model racing is a fantastic way to attend your first race or your 100th. And if you've got your eyes set on NASCAR superstardom, this is something you're going to have to master one day. New or old, fan or competitor, here's where it all starts for just about everybody. The prologues for the next generation of stars are being written out there right now somewhere, and one day you might just be able to tell somebody, yeah, I knew that guy before he was famous. Anyway, I'm Slapshoes, thanks for watching, and until next time, y'all take it easy.